Imagine, if you will, a brilliantly educated, deeply respected 18th century scientist proposing a serious formal experiment.
Right.
And he suggests taking a group of black people from Senegal, right, transporting them to the freezing, windswept climate of Denmark and completely isolating them there.
Just dropping them in the cold.
Exactly. And the entire purpose of this proposed experiment, he wanted to wait and see how many generations it would take for the cold, temperate weather to physically transform their descendants into people with white skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes.
Yeah, it's just a
Sounds like absolute madness to us today. I mean, totally unhinged. But this wasn't fringe science. This was actually the cutting edge of biological theory during the Enlightenment.
It really highlights how bizarre the history of science can be when you pull back the curtain, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
Because that proposal, it came from Georges-Louis Leclerc, the Comte de Buffon.
Yeah.
He was one of the most influential naturalists of his entire era. And his reasoning perfectly encapsulates this deeply ingrained assumption about human nature that we are going to tear apart today.
Exactly. Because we're so accustomed to pointing our collective finger at the 18th and 19th centuries when we talk about the invention of scientific racism.
Yeah, we think of it as a modern thing.
Right. We're taught it's a byproduct of European colonialism, of the transatlantic slave trade, and those twisted early interpretations of evolutionary theory. It's treated like a distinctly modern disease.
But it's really not.
No, it's not. And that's why today we are taking a deep dive into a truly groundbreaking book called The Invention of Racism in Classical Antiquity by historian Benjamin Isaac.
A fantastic, eye-opening book.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to trace the roots of what Isaac terms proto-racism. We are going to explore how geography, the weather, and, mythology were weaponized to justify ancient empires thousands of years before the Enlightenment.
And I think setting the stage for you, the listener, is incredibly important here right off the bat.
Yes, absolutely.
What we are doing in this deep dive is tracking the history of an idea. By analyzing these ancient texts, from Greek medical treatises to Roman philosophy, we are absolutely not endorsing these prejudices.
Right. Definitely not taking any sides or endorsing any of the hateful stuff in these texts.
Exactly. We are dissecting them. We are putting them under a microscope to understand the mechanics of bigotry. We want to see how early human civilizations attempted to categorize the complex world around them and how those early categorizations really laid the intellectual groundwork for centuries of harm.
Well said. So we have this consensus among modern scholars that the 1700s is basically ground zero for scientific racism. But Benjamin Isaac makes a massive claim right at the start of the book.
He really goes for it.
He does. He argues that the Enlightenment thinkers, the guys we credit with inventing modern scientific inquiry, were actually just recycling concepts from ancient Greece and Rome.
Yeah, they weren't inventing these toxic ideas at all.
They were dusting them off.
Right, they were heavily reliant on classical antiquity. And to understand the ancient roots, you actually have to look at how that 18th century bridge was built. So let's return to Buffon and his wild Denmark experiment.
Please, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
So Buffon believed in monogenesis.
Yeah.
That is the idea that all of humanity shares a single common origin.
Okay, that sounds reasonable enough.
It does, but his view of that origin was deeply flawed and incredibly biased. He believed that the so-called white man living in a temperate European climate was the original baseline of humanity.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, the standard model, if you will.
So in his mind, anything that deviated from that European baseline was what, like an error?
He literally termed it degeneration.
Wow.
Yeah. Buffon theorized that as human beings migrated away from the temperate zones of Europe and moved into the tropics, the harsh, extreme climates physically altered them.
Because of the weather.
Right. He believed the blazing sun and the tropical heat literally baked these changes into human biology over generations, making their skin darker and, in his hierarchical view, turning them into a lesser form of humanity.
Okay, that brings up a fascinating mechanism. He thought the sun literally transformed their inherent value as human beings. But why Denmark? Why propose taking people from Senegal and moving them to the freezing cold?
Because if you believe that climate is the sole driver of human physical and moral traits, then the process should theoretically be reversible.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. Buffon assumed that because the tropical sun had caused this degeneration, moving them back to a cold, European climate would eventually, quote-unquote, cure them.
That is just wild.
Would thought the freezing air of Denmark would restore them to his imagined baseline.
It's almost like treating human beings like a sourdough starter.
A sourdough starter. Okay, I like that.
Well, think about the mechanics of baking. If you take a sourdough starter from a bakery in San Francisco with its very specific temperature, local humidity, and the unique wild yeast floating in the air.
Right, the famous San Francisco sour.
Exactly. And you fly that starter to a bakery in Copenhagen, the bread is going to taste entirely different after a few generations of feeding it.
Because of the environment.
Yes. The local environment completely alters the final bake. Buffon was looking at human beings exactly like that.
He really was.
He thought the local air, the temperature, and the barometric pressure would physically rewrite human biology over time.
That analogy captures the logic perfectly. And Buffon wasn't alone in this.
Who else?
Immanuel Kant, the foundational German philosopher.
Kant. Wow, okay. A heavy hitter.
Right. He was writing around the same time and adopted a very similar view. Kant argued that the hot climate of Africa created a race that was fundamentally lacking in higher mental capacities.
Ugh.
Yeah. But Kant added a devastating twist to your sourdough starter theory.
What was the twist?
He argued that after a certain number of generations in that extreme climate, the acquired traits became permanent.
Wait, so the environment bakes the clay, but eventually the clay sets permanently in the kiln.
Exactly.
You can't soften it and reshape it anymore?
That is the exact mechanism Kant proposed. He claimed that even if you move someone from a hot climate to a cold one, after a certain evolutionary point, the damage was done.
So no more reversing it like Buffon thought.
Right. The traits were locked into the lineage permanently. Nature had made an original, unalterable distinction between these groups.
That's incredibly dark.
And this specific combination, the idea that the environment alters human biology, mixed with the idea that these changes eventually become permanent and hereditary, is ripped straight from the scrolls of classical antiquity.
See, I can hear the skeptics right now, though. People who study Roman history or whatever might say, come on, the Romans didn't understand genetics.
They definitely didn't have DNA.
Right. They didn't have DNA sequencing or germ theory. How could they be racist in the biological way we understand it today?
And, that skepticism is entirely valid. It's why Benjamin Isaac spends so much time defining his terms in the book.
We really need to pin down the definitions here.
We do. To find racism in the ancient world, we have to be incredibly precise with our vocabulary. We have to draw a very hard, very clear line between what we call ethnic prejudice on one side and proto-racism on the other.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's decode the vocabulary of hate, starting with ethnic prejudice. What is the defining characteristic there?
Ethnic prejudice is essentially a prejudgment based on cultural stereotyping.
Okay.
It happens when you treat an entire group of people as a monolith, right? Assuming every single person in that group shares a specific behavioral, cultural, or moral trait.
Sure, we see that all the time.
But the crucial distinction is that ethnic prejudice allows for the possibility of change.
Ah, right.
It is cultural, not biological. It assumes someone can adopt new customs or learn new behaviors.
The book actually uses a surprisingly modern and honestly kind of funny example to illustrate this exact point.
Yes, the Michelin Guide.
Yeah, Isaac brings up the 1996 Michelin Guide to Venice.
It is a perfect example of how casual and insidious stereotyping can be, even when the intention isn't malicious at all.
Right. I mean, the Michelin Guide, the prestigious restaurant and travel book, they have a section describing the local people of Venice, and the guide confidently claims that Venetians are born with a positive outlook on life.
Which sounds nice.
It does, and that they possess an Anglo-Saxon aplomb. It's written entirely as a compliment.
Right.
But it's still a massive, flattening stereotype. I mean, it takes an entire city of thousands of incredibly diverse, complicated individuals who have bad days and good days.
People who get stuck in traffic, or, well, boat traffic.
Exactly, and reduces them to a single, cheerful, unflappable mascot.
It completely ignores individual human agency.
But according to Isaac's definition, that is just prejudice, not racism.
Exactly. Because, presumably, a Venetian could move to high-stress Manhattan, get a terrible job, and completely lose their positive outlook and their Anglo-Saxon aplomb.
Right. The Michelin Guide isn't claiming that cheerfulness is permanently coded into their genetic sequence, unalterable by their environment or personal choices.
That flexibility is the hallmark of ethnic prejudice. Now, contrast that with proto-racism, or what we simply call racism today.
What's the rigid definition there?
Racism is the belief that a group's physical, mental, and moral traits are completely unalterable by human will.
Unalterable.
Yes. It posits that these traits are permanently fixed, either by absolute hereditary descent or by permanent environmental factors. Racism says, you are this way, your children will be this way, and no amount of education, relocation, or personal effort can ever change it.
So if an ancient Roman senator stands up in the forum and says, those Gauls from the north have terrible table manners, they don't know how to mix their wine with water, and they are hopelessly uncultured,
Right.
that is ethnic prejudice.
Yes, it is.
Because theoretically, a Gaul could move to Rome, hire a rhetorician, learn perfect Latin, and, learn which fork to use at a banquet. The Gaul has the capacity to assimilate.
The culture can be learned. But if that same Roman senator stands up and says, the Gauls are inherently stupid and excessively violent because the freezing cold weather of the north has permanently stunted their intellectual development, and therefore no Gaul will ever be capable of intelligent thought or rational self-governance. Well, that crosses the line.
Because it removes the possibility of a Gaul ever changing.
Exactly.
It locks the entire population into a permanent, inescapable destiny based on factors like the weather of their homeland that are entirely outside of their personal control.
It denies the very concept of individual merit. And what makes this history so tragic is that the core concept they are judging people on, the idea of distinct biological races, doesn't actually exist in science.
That's a huge point to make.
It is. Modern genetics and biology have overwhelmingly proven that race is a historical and social construct, not a biological reality.
I think a lot of people still struggle with that concept, the idea that race isn't a biological fact.
Oh, it is deeply counterintuitive to how we are raised to see the world. But human populations have migrated, intermingled, and mixed so continuously throughout tens of thousands of years of history that you simply cannot cleanly divide humanity into distinct biological subspecies.
We're all just too blended.
Exactly. Any physical differences we see, like variations in skin melanin or eye shape, are superficial, localized evolutionary adaptations to sunlight or climate.
Right, just surface-level adaptations.
They do not correlate in any way, shape, or form to mental capacity, morality, character, or intelligence.
The source material actually highlights a really fascinating legal case from the United Kingdom that perfectly demonstrates this.
Oh, the 1983 case.
Yeah, it shows just how slippery, made-up, and socially constructed the concept of race actually is.
Right, the case of Mandela v. Dowell Lee, which went all the way to the House of Lords.
That's the one.
It initially revolved around the application of the UK Race Relations Act concerning the Sikh community, but the legal precedent was subsequently applied to the Romani people, often referred to as gypsies.
So the context was that these communities were facing severe housing and employment discrimination.
Terrible discrimination.
And to protect them under the law, the UK courts had to officially, legally define them as a racial group. The anti-discrimination legislation required them to fit into the box of a race.
Right, the law demanded a box.
But biologically speaking, they aren't a separate, distinct race in any scientific sense.
So the courts found themselves in this massive philosophical bind.
What did they do?
They couldn't use biology, so they had to create a legal definition based on social factors.
Right.
The House of Lords ruled that an ethnic group could legally be considered a race if they shared a long shared history of which the group was conscious, a cultural tradition of their own, and a presumed common geographical descent.
Even if they didn't have a strict biological link.
Exactly, even if they no longer derive from a strictly common biological stock.
It is wild that courts have to perform these massive philosophical gymnastics just to apply anti-discrimination laws.
It really is.
I mean, it proves that the definition of race is entirely socially constructed. We made it up. But we made it up so thoroughly that our legal systems have to pretend it's real just to protect people from the very real harm it causes.
That's a great way to put it. The racist believes the biological fiction is an absolute truth.
Yeah.
And in the ancient world, the Greeks and Romans built incredibly elaborate, pseudoscientific fictions to justify their prejudices.
Since they didn't have genetics, what did they use?
They developed three primary intellectual tools to construct this deterministic trap: environmental determinism, physiognomics, and the concept of pure lineage.
Okay, let's really dig into the mechanics of these three tools. How did they actually think this worked?
Sure. Let's start with environmental determinism.
We've touched on that, the idea of the weather baking the clay. But let's look at the ancient physiological logic behind it. They didn't just think a gloomy day made you sad, right?
Oh, no, it was much deeper than that. They believed in a concept called acquired heredity, which was deeply tied to their understanding of medicine, specifically the four humors.
The humors. Okay, blood, phlegm.
Right. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Ancient doctors believed the human body was filled with these four distinct fluids.
And health was just balancing them.
Exactly. Health was a perfect balance of these humors. They firmly believed that the climate you lived in, the heat, the cold, the moisture in the air, the quality of drinking water, directly impacted the balance of these humors.
Okay, so if you live in a damp, swampy area, your body absorbs that moisture.
Precisely their logic.
Uh-huh.
They thought a swampy environment would increase the phlegm in your body,
Oh, gross.
making you literally phlegmatic, sluggish, lethargic, slow to act.
Wait, they took the literal fluid and turned it into a personality trait?
Absolutely. And they believed that if a population lived in that swampy climate for centuries, that humoral imbalance would literally reshape their physical bodies and their psychological makeup.
Wow.
And crucially, once that reshaping happened, it became locked into their seed. It was passed down to their children, even if those children eventually moved away from the swamp.
So that is tool number one. The environment alters your bodily fluids, which permanently alters your descendants.
Right.
What is tool number two? Physiognomics. Because that sounds like someone reading tea leaves or doing palmistry at a carnival.
It essentially was the ancient version of that. But you have to understand, it was treated with the utmost seriousness by philosophers.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Physiognomics is the practice of judging a person's inner moral character, their intelligence, and their personality, based entirely on their outward physical appearance.
Like phrenology later on?
Very similar. There are entire ancient treatises dedicated to this. They would argue that if a person had a wide, thick neck, it meant they had the fiery, stubborn character of a bull.
Because they look like a bull.
Yes. Or if they had a slender, sharp face, they were cunning and deceitful like a fox.
They were diagnosing morality based on the shape of someone's jawline.
Yes. And the danger was that they didn't just apply it to individuals, they scaled it up to entire nations.
Oh, of course they did.
If an ancient Greek writer decided that a certain physical trait, perhaps a specific shape of the nose or a certain skin tone, was common among a foreign population, they would use physiognomics to declare that the entire nation possessed the negative moral flaw associated with that physical trait.
That's terrifying.
It was a pseudoscientific method of making vast cultural stereotypes look like empirical, observable data.
You can see how these tools stack on top of each other. The environment sets the traits. Physiognomics allows you to read the traits on a person's face, and then there is the third tool.
Yes, pure lineage or the obsession with pure blood.
Let's talk about that, because that one feels very close to modern racism.
It is perhaps the most chilling because it so directly prefigures the horrific state-sponsored racism of the 20th century. The obsession with pure uncontaminated blood didn't begin in 1930s Europe. It originated thousands of years earlier, most notably in 5th century BC, Athens.
Athens, the absolute golden city.
Right.
The birthplace of democracy, the home of Socrates, the pinnacle of classical art.
The very same. The Athenians developed this powerful civic mythology, claiming they were autochthonous.
Autochthonous. What does that mean exactly?
It's a Greek word that essentially translates to sprung from the earth itself.
Like plants.
Literally. They believed that their earliest ancestors were not migrants who traveled from elsewhere, but that they grew directly out of the native soil of the Attica Peninsula, like trees.
It is the ultimate claim to indigenous superiority. I mean, we didn't move here. The earth birthed us here.
Exactly. And the corollary to that myth was the belief that their bloodline was completely unmixed with any other migrating peoples or foreign invaders.
Right, because nobody else sprang from that specific dirt.
Exactly. Because their blood was pure, unpolluted by the lesser traits of foreigners, they believed they were inherently biologically superior to all other Greeks, let alone non-Greeks.
Think about what that means in practice when you combine all three tools. We go back to the sourdough starter analogy.
Let's hear it.
It means they believed the specific, perfect environment of Athens baked the clay into the ideal human form. And once that perfect form was achieved, pure lineage was required as a strict biological quarantine to keep the starter dough from getting contaminated.
That's exactly it, a quarantine.
Right. Mixing their blood with people from different environments who had different humors and different physiognomic flaws would produce inferior, polluted offspring.
It creates a perfectly sealed system of supremacy. And you can see how incredibly useful this was for the needs of a growing empire.
Oh, incredibly convenient.
A complete lack of actual genetic knowledge didn't stop them from creating these rigid, unforgiving social hierarchies.
Not at all.
If you genuinely believe that your people possess the optimal climate, the most beautiful and moral physical features, and pure, uncontaminated blood, it provides the ultimate moral justification for why your city-state deserves to subjugate everyone else.
Because it's just science to them.
Right. You aren't acting out of greed or a desire for power. You are simply fulfilling nature's biological design.
You are acting as the enforcer of the natural order. It turns imperial violence into a moral imperative.
Yes.
And to see how this environmental determinism actually played out in the writing of the time, we have to look at the guy who basically invented the systemic recording of history.
Herodotus.
Right, the father of history. Writing in the 5th century BC, his work is this sprawling, fascinating compilation of historical events, ethnographies of foreign peoples, local folklore, all of it.
He really was a pioneer. But regarding the history of proto-racism, Herodotus is a crucial transitional figure.
Transitional how?
He flirts very heavily with environmental determinism, but he doesn't quite fall into the trap of absolute biological destiny that later writers do.
He observes the patterns, but he doesn't necessarily lock the door behind them.
Exactly.
There's a famous story right at the end of his massive historical work that illustrates his view on geography beautifully. It involves Cyrus the Great.
Yes, the legendary founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Herodotus concludes his entire history with this anecdote.
So the setup is this, just to remind you listeners. The Persians originate from a very rugged, harsh, unforgiving, mountainous region. And through incredible military prowess, they have just conquered the Medes and built this massive, wealthy empire encompassing huge swaths of fertile territory.
They've won the lottery, basically.
Right. So a prominent Persian advisor named Artaxerxes approaches Cyrus the Great with what seems like a very logical proposal. He says, look, we own all this rich, lush, beautiful, plain territory now. Why are our people still living in these miserable, freezing mountains? Let's pack up the entire society and move down to the luxury of the plains.
It seems like the natural reward for a victorious, expanding empire. You take the best land.
Exactly. But Cyrus the Great immediately rejects the proposal. And he gives a very specific warning. He says, soft countries breed soft men.
Soft countries breed soft men.
Yeah. Cyrus argues that if the Persians leave their harsh, unforgiving mountains for the easy fertility of the plains, they will lose their military edge. They will cease to be the rulers of the world and will inevitably become the slaves of others.
The underlying logic there is profound for our discussion.
How so?
It shows that by the 5th century BC, the idea was already widely circulating and accepted. A hard life in a harsh landscape produces superior, resilient warriors, while a life of agricultural luxury in a soft environment makes a population weak, complacent, and submissive.
Herodotus also spends a massive amount of time writing out Egypt, doesn't he? He seems obsessed with how different they are from the Greeks.
Oh, he dedicates an entire book of his history to Egypt.
Wow.
And he relies on a very rigid form of environmental mirroring to explain their culture.
Environmental mirroring.
Yeah, he notes that the climate of Egypt is essentially the exact opposite of the Mediterranean.
Because it's so dry.
Right. Instead of rain in the winter, their entire agricultural system relies on the Nile River flooding in the heat of the summer.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because their climate and their river behave in an inverted, backward manner compared to Greece, Herodotus argues that the Egyptian people have developed cultural customs that are the exact reverse of the rest of mankind.
He lists all these examples, right? Like how Egyptian women go to the market to trade while the men sit at home and weave at the loom.
Yes, he's drawing a direct causal line. Strange inverted climate naturally equals strange inverted culture.
And importantly, as he maps out the known world, Herodotus is one of the very first writers to explicitly state that Greece possesses the best tempered climate on Earth.
The most moderate, the most balanced.
Okay, let me push back on this, though, or at least ask for a clarification.
Sure.
If Herodotus explicitly writes that soft countries breed soft men, and he also claims that Greece has the absolute best, most moderate climate in the world, I mean, doesn't that make him a strict proto-racist? Doesn't that heavily imply he thinks the Greeks are genetically superior because of their perfect weather?
It is a vital distinction to make. Herodotus certainly possesses immense ethnic prejudice and deep Greek chauvinism.
Really?
He thinks Greek culture is superior, but he uses geography to condition human existence, not to absolutely irrevocably determine it.
Condition versus determinant.
Yeah. Right. When Cyrus warns that soft countries breed soft men, the implication is that if the Persians move to the plains, their lifestyle will change. They will become accustomed to wealth and ease.
Oh, so it's a behavioral shift.
It is a behavioral and cultural shift brought on by the environment. Herodotus does not claim that the Greek climate mutates Greek DNA into an unalterably fixed master race. He believes the environment influences behavior, but he generally leaves room for human agency.
Got it. He's saying the environment hands you a certain set of cards, but it doesn't force you to play them a certain way. You can still make choices.
Precisely. To see geography fully weaponized into a theory of absolute, inescapable biological destiny, we have to look away from the historians.
Where do we look then?
Historians observe the messy reality of human events. To find the hard, deterministic rules, we have to look toward the scientific community of the ancient world. We have to look at the medical texts.
Which brings us to the absolute holy grail of ancient environmental determinism. If you want to find the smoking gun for where proto-racism truly solidifies into pseudoscience, it is a late 5th century medical treatise from the Hippocratic corpus called Airs, Waters, Places.
It is impossible to overstate the influence of this single document.
It's that big.
Huge. It is widely considered one of the most foundational texts in the history of medicine, geography, and anthropology. And it cast a very long, very dark shadow over Western intellectual thought for over 2 millennia.
The basic premise of the text sounds completely reasonable at first glance, though. I mean, it's a handbook for traveling physicians, telling them that to properly diagnose and treat illnesses in a new town, they need to pay attention to the local environment.
Which is good advice.
Yeah. Which way does the wind blow? Is the water source a stagnant pond or a running spring? Is it a high-altitude city or situated in a humid valley? That is just solid, practical medical science.
Absolutely. If you drink from a stagnant swamp, you're going to get a parasite.
Right. But Airs, Waters, Places doesn't stop at diagnosing physical ailments, does it?
No, it takes a massive, unwarranted leap.
Uh-oh.
The author moves from basic medical observation into grand, sweeping sociological and biological determinism. The text attempts to explain not just disease, but the entirety of human nature, warfare, and politics through the lens of climate.
Just blaming the weather for everything.
Literally everything. And in doing so, this medical text essentially invents the binary opposition that still haunts modern geopolitics. The fundamental divide of East versus West, or as they framed it, Asia versus Europe.
Let's really break down the physiological mechanisms the author claims are at work here. How does the text describe Asia? And, just to be clear, by Asia, they generally meant the vast territories of the Persian Empire, Anatolia, and the Near East.
Right. The author paints a picture of Asia as an incredibly lush, beautiful, moderate paradise. The climate is described as uniform. The seasons bleed into one another without any violent fluctuations in temperature. It's a mild, exceedingly pleasant environment where crops grow easily and life is physically untaxing.
Okay, and according to the Hippocratic medical logic, what is the biological result of living for generations in a mild, uniform paradise?
The text claims that because the Asiatic peoples are never forced to endure hardship or extreme weather, their bodies grow to be tall, beautiful, and well-nourished.
That sounds like a compliment.
But internally, their humors are stagnant.
Oh, back to the humors.
Yes. Because they lack physical stimulation from the environment, the text explicitly argues they become utterly feeble, docile, gentle, and inherently cowardly.
Cowardly just because the weather is nice.
The author writes that courage, tenacity, energy, and willpower could not develop under such natural conditions. The environment has literally robbed them of the biological capacity for bravery.
Wow. It is physically impossible for them to fight fiercely because the mild weather has essentially sedated their nervous system.
That's the argument.
Now, contrast that with how the text describes the environment of Europe, the lands to the north and west.
Europe is depicted as an environmental nightmare.
Naturally.
It has a wildly fluctuating, harsh climate. Brutally freezing winters, scorching summers, violent storms, and rapid, jarring changes in the weather from day to day.
And how do those violent temperature swings affect the human body?
The author claims that these constant violent changes in the environment cause literal shocks to the mind and the body.
Shocks to the mind.
Yes, the European physiology is constantly forced into a state of fight or flight just to survive the weather. As a result, the text claims Europeans become wild, ferocious, and deeply unsociable. They are essentially untamed beasts.
But I'm guessing they have courage.
Oh, absolutely. Because they are continuously fighting the elements, their internal heat is stoked. They are incredibly brave, fiercely independent, and capable of immense, violent endurance.
So you have the docile, physically beautiful, cowardly Asiatic on one side, and the ferocious, wild, incredibly brave European on the other.
That's the binary.
But the author doesn't just blame the weather. He also brings politics into the equation, but he makes the political institutions entirely subordinate to the climate.
The integration of politics is what makes the theory so insidious.
How so?
The text notes that the vast majority of Asia is ruled by absolute despots, kings who hold the power of life and death over their subjects.
Right.
The author argues that because the Asiatics live under this despotic system, they are forced to fight wars not for their own freedom or property, but solely to increase the wealth of their master.
Which, honestly, why would a man risk his life in battle when he doesn't get to keep the spoils?
It seems like a solid sociological observation, right?
Yeah.
Oppression kills morale.
Yeah, totally.
But the author loops it right back to biology. He argues that the mild climate predisposes the Asiatics to cowardice, which makes it easy for despots to enslave them.
Oh, I see.
And once enslaved, the despotic institutions reinforce their biological cowardice.
A vicious cycle. What about the Europeans?
Conversely, the Europeans live in a harsh climate that makes them naturally fierce and independent. Because they are wild and fierce, they refuse to be ruled by kings. They live as free men, fighting for their own interests, which in turn reinforces their natural bravery.
It is a perfectly sealed, self-justifying loop of deterministic logic. The soft climate creates soft people, who naturally invite tyranny, which makes them softer.
Exactly.
And the hard climate creates hard people who naturally demand freedom, which makes them harder.
It's all tied up in a neat little bow.
But as I was reading this breakdown of airs, waters, places, I noticed a massive, glaring paradox right in the middle of it.
I think I knew what you were going to say, the omission of the author's own home.
Yes, exactly. The author of this text is a Greek physician. He is writing in the Greek language, presumably for an audience of other Greek physicians.
Right.
He lives in the Greek world, which enjoys a beautiful, relatively mild Mediterranean climate. And yet, in this entire sweeping, grand, unifying theory about the fierce, freezing Europeans and the soft, warm Asiatics, the author completely leaves the Greeks out of the equation.
It's unbelievable.
Greece is mysteriously absent from this grand map of the continents. Why? Did he just forget to look out the window at his own neighbors?
You hit on the exact flaw that proves this isn't science at all.
It can't be.
The glaring omission of Greece demonstrates that this text is an exercise in armchair bigotry. It's a theoretical construct designed to explain away the foreign world.
Because if he applied his own medical rules to the Greeks, the whole theory would implode.
Precisely. The Greeks lived in a moderate, warm climate very similar to the coastal regions of the cowardly Asiatics.
Right.
Yet the Greeks considered themselves the bravest, most fiercely independent, and militarily superior people on Earth.
So the math doesn't work.
The lived reality of Greek existence completely contradicted the author's environmental mathematical formula. So rather than adjust his scientific theory to fit the evidence, he simply ignored Greece to make the math work.
It strongly suggests the author never actually traveled to the places he was diagnosing. I mean, he didn't sail to the far reaches of the Persian Empire or ride deep into the freezing steppes of Scythia to take their pulse.
We can be almost certain he didn't, because when he lacks empirical data, he relies entirely on local myths and folktales, dressing them up as medical diagnoses.
Like what? What kind of myths?
Well, for instance, when he writes about the Scythians, the nomadic, horseback-riding tribes living in the harsh plains to the north, he repeats some truly absurd mythology as biological fact.
Oh, this ought to be good.
He claims that because the Scythians spend their entire lives riding horses in the freezing cold without proper trousers.
Wait, without proper trousers?
Yes. He claims that continuous jolting in the cold air caused mass, widespread impotence among all their men.
You're kidding.
I wish I was. He then claims this medical condition forces a reversal of societal gender roles, arguing that the men become effeminate out of biological necessity.
He's taking the cultural shock of seeing a different way of life. A nomadic society where women might have had different roles than cloistered Athenian wives, and medicalizing it.
Yes, exactly.
He's turning cultural difference into a biological disease.
And that is the true danger of airs, waters, places. It uses the authority of medicine to fundamentally deny individuality and humanity to foreigners.
It gives prejudice a lab coat.
Brilliantly put. It establishes the concept of the barbarian, not just as someone who speaks a different language, but as someone who is fundamentally biologically other. The Asiatic is medically diagnosed as being programmed for slavery. The European is diagnosed as being programmed for mindless wildness.
This is the absolute dawn of proto-racism masquerading as empirical science.
It really is.
So we have the medical blueprint established, the doctors have spoken, and their diagnosis is that geography dictates your destiny.
Right.
But a medical text doesn't raise armies. A doctor's handbook doesn't declare war or pass laws. How did this pseudoscientific idea jump from the physician's tent into the very core of Western political thought?
That's the million-dollar question.
How did the people running the cities take this and run with it?
For that leap, we have to move from medicine to philosophy. We have to look at how the greatest minds of the ancient world gatedly, Plato and Aristotle, adopted these medical theories and weaponized them into what we might call the Goldilocks supremacy.
Plato and Aristotle, the heavy hitters.
The biggest.
You cannot take a philosophy 101 class anywhere in the world without reading these two men. Their influence on how Western civilization views ethics, justice, politics, and human nature cannot be overstated.
They are the bedrock.
But they were also products of their time, and they fully bought into and refined the environmental determinism laid out by the medical writers.
Absolutely. Let's start by looking at Plato. In his major foundational political works, specifically the Laws and the Republic, Plato does not hesitate to blame the national character of foreign populations directly on their physical environment.
He really leans into it. He goes out of his way to assign specific, unalterable moral flaws to entire nations. For example, he claims that the Egyptians and the Phoenicians possess an inherent collective love of money.
Right.
It's not just that their economies are built on trade. He argues they are biologically predisposed to greed. And he claims the Thracians and the Scythians in the freezing north have a collective, uncontrollable hot temper.
And Plato makes it very clear that these are not just learned cultural habits that can be unlearned.
No, it's baked in.
He explicitly states that these moral failings are directly caused by the winds, the ambient heat, and the quality of the water in their specific homelands.
That's wild.
In the Laws, when he's advising how to build an ideal new city-state, he warns the lawmakers that they must meticulously study the local climate before breaking ground.
Why?
Because the local environment will literally, physically nourish or poison the moral soul of the inhabitants.
So Plato establishes the philosophical rule that the weather dictates your morality.
He does.
But it is his star pupil, Aristotle, who takes this theory, polishes it, and sharpens it into the ultimate ideological weapon of Greek supremacy.
Yes. Aristotle takes all the loose threads of environmental determinism from the doctors and the historians, and in his masterpiece Politics, specifically Book 7, he synthesizes them into a flawless, perfectly self-serving geopolitical map.
He divides the entire known world into 3 distinct psychological and geographic zones. Let me lay out this map because the logic of it is incredible in its audacity.
It really is. Go for it.
The Goldilocks theory. First, Aristotle looks to the freezing north of Europe. He says, okay, the northern Europeans live in a brutal, cold climate. According to our medical understanding, this freezing air concentrates their internal heat, which fills them with spirit, what the Greeks called thumos.
Right, thumo.
So they have boundless energy, courage, and bravery.
But there is a catch.
A huge catch. Aristotle argues that because they are so full of this fiery, wild spirit, they completely lack intellectual capacity and skill. Their brains are basically frozen.
That's the argument.
So they possess enough raw bravery to fight off invaders and remain politically free, but they are far too stupid to ever develop complex political institutions, to organize a civilized society, or to ever successfully rule over anyone else. They are essentially free, wild beasts.
That is zone 1, all spirit, absolutely no brains.
Right. Now, what does he say about the East?
He looks at Asia. He says, the Asiatics live in a hot, mild, comfortable climate. This constant heat diffuses their internal energy but sharpens their minds. This gives them immense technical skill, artistry, and high intelligence.
So they are brilliant craftsmen and profound thinkers.
But again, the environmental catch.
Right. Because their climate is so warm and uniform, they completely lack thymos.
Yes.
They have absolutely no spirit, no inner fire, no courage. Therefore, despite their immense intelligence and their beautiful cities, they are inherent cowards. Because they won't fight for their freedom, they are naturally, biologically destined to be conquered and live perpetually as slaves.
Zone 2. All brains, absolutely no spirit. They are highly intelligent prey.
And then Aristotle looks at his own people. He looks at Greece.
Conveniently.
Very conveniently. And he says, but look at where Greece is located on the map. We are geographically situated perfectly in the middle of the world. We are not too cold like the barbarous Europeans, and we are not too hot like the cowardly Asiatics.
It's just right.
Exactly. Therefore, by an absolute miracle of geographic positioning, the Greeks uniquely possess both the fiery, courageous spirit of the Northern Europeans and the brilliant, cunning intelligence of the Asiatics.
The Goldilocks zone. It is not too hot, not too cold. It is biologically just right.
Aristotle essentially gerrymandered the philosophical map of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely did.
He drew the boundaries of human potential specifically to place his own city dead center, ensuring that by the very infallible laws of nature, the Greeks won the genetic, moral, and intellectual lottery.
The audacity is staggering, honestly.
It's off the charts.
But the implications are devastating. Because this isn't just an exercise in local pride or a philosopher patting himself on the back.
Right.
This specific geographic mapping is the required intellectual foundation for Aristotle's most infamous destructive doctrine, the doctrine of natural slavery.
Because Aristotle didn't just believe slavery was a byproduct of losing a war, right? He actually argued that certain groups of human beings are quite literally biologically born to be slaves.
Exactly. Aristotle argued that the universe operates on a strict hierarchy of dominance. Just as the soul must naturally rule the physical body and the intellect must naturally rule the wild passions, the naturally superior human being must rule the naturally inferior human being.
It's a law of nature to him.
Yes, and who is naturally inferior. According to his meticulously crafted environmental map, it is the Asiatics who lack the spirit for freedom and the Europeans who lack the intelligence for self-rule.
The Greeks have the balance, therefore the Greeks are meant to hold the leash.
By synthesizing environmental determinism with his political philosophy, Aristotle provided the ultimate unbreakable proto-racist justification for imperialism. It provides absolute moral absolution for the conqueror.
It allows an empire to say, we conquer you, not because we are greedy for your land, not because we want your gold or your resources, but because nature herself designed us to rule and nature designed you to serve. We are bringing order to the universe.
It framed the horrific violence of empire building as a necessary fulfillment of biological destiny. And think about the historical impact of this.
Yeah.
Alexander the Great, who went on to conquer the entirety of the Persian Empire, stretching the Greek world all the way to India.
Right.
Who was his personal tutor.
Aristotle personally tutored a young Alexander.
Exactly. So when Alexander the Great marched east, slaughtered armies, and subjugated millions of people, he wasn't just armed with superior feelings tactics.
He was armed with philosophy.
He was armed with the absolute unshakable philosophical certainty, taught to him by the smartest man in the world, that the Asiatic peoples he was conquering were geographically, biologically destined to kneel to him.
Wow. It is genuinely chilling to trace the architecture of that thought process. You start with a pragmatic doctor looking at a swamp and saying, hey, different weather makes people sick in different ways.
Right. Simple observation.
And within a few generations, you have the greatest philosophers of the age twisting that medical observation into a grand theory that geography justifies global domination and permanent natural slavery.
And that is the enduring, insidious danger of proto-racism.
What do you mean?
It takes observable, superficial differences, different cultural customs, different climates, different styles of dress or warfare, and it weaponizes them by entirely removing human agency.
It locks you into a box.
Yes. It whispers the lie that your destiny, your morality, and your worth are written into the soil you were born on, and that absolutely nothing you do, no amount of individual effort or brilliance can ever change it.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's summarize the immense ground we've covered today for you, the listener.
We've covered a lot.
We really have. The toxic idea of biological, geographic, and racial destiny, the idea that some groups of human beings are inherently, unalterably superior to others, was not just cooked up in a 19th century laboratory.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was certainly refined and weaponized to horrific new extremes during the eras of the transatlantic slave trade and European colonialism. But the earliest foundational blueprints for this machinery of bigotry were drafted thousands of years ago.
They were drafted by the brilliant, foundational, yet incredibly biased philosophers, historians, and physicians of classical antiquity.
They used the weather, the landscape, the medical theories of humors, and the pseudoscience of pure blood to draw rigid, inescapable lines around humanity.
And they did it primarily to justify the dominance, the wealth, and the expansion of their own empires.
They baked the clay in the kiln of their own prejudice, and humanity has been trying to shatter that clay ever since.
Studying this history forces us to confront a very uncomfortable reality, I think.
Yeah.
It shows us that even the most celebrated, revered intellectual traditions, the very bedrock of Western civilization, can harbor profoundly dangerous, destructive ideas. It means we have a responsibility to read these classical texts not just with blind reverence, but with a sharp, critical understanding of the historical and intellectual baggage they continue to carry into the present.
And that leads me to a final provocative thought to leave you with, something for you to mull over on your own as you consume the news and look at the modern world.
What's the thought?
Today, in our supposedly enlightened modern political discourse, we constantly use terms like the global south.
We hear that all the time.
We talk endlessly on news panels about how the geopolitics of a specific region dictates its economic destiny. We point to harsh environments, rugged terrains, or tropical climates, and we make grand, sweeping, confident generalizations about the political stability, the institutional capacity, or even the inherent work ethic of the nations located there.
It is literally the standard language of modern international relations.
So here's the question you have to ask yourself. When we do that, when we casually assume that a country's geography or climate automatically determines the success of its institutions or the inherent character of its people, are we genuinely practicing modern, objective political science?
That's the big question.
Or are we completely unconsciously echoing the ancient deterministic ghosts of airs, waters, places? Are we still letting the ancient Greeks draw the map of human potential? Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep looking for the muddy waters behind the X-ray. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.